The hall smelled like wet fur and desperation. I stood at the edge of the stage, if you could call it that, a rickety platform of warped wood that groaned under the weight of expectation. Around me, the pack gathered in their finest attempt at civilization. Leather jackets over bare chests, dresses that clung to curves meant to seduce, eyes that glittered with the kind of cruelty that comes easy when you're born strong. I was not strong. The annual gathering wasn't about unity, no matter what the elders claimed. It was an exhibition, a meat market. Alphas strutted, betas schemed, and omegas like me, the broken ones, the weak ones, we performed our little tricks and hoped someone would find us useful enough to claim. My hair hung limp around my shoulders, pale as winter wheat, damp from the rain I'd walked through to get here. No one had offered me a ride. No one ever did. "You're up next, runt," Cassidy hissed as she brushed past me, her red dress a slash of violence against the dim lighting. She was everything I wasn't, curved where I was angular, confident where I trembled, wanted where I was tolerated. Try not to embarrass us more than you already do just by existing. The others laughed. They always laughed. I'd heard worse. Been called worse. The pack had made it clear since my first shift at 16 that I was a mistake, a genetic hiccup, an omega so weak that even my scent barely registered. Other omegas had that pull, that sweetness that made alphas lose their minds during heat. Me? I smelled like nothing, like air, like absence. "Maybe she'll finally find someone desperate enough," another voice called out. More laughter. My fingers curled into fists, nails biting into palms. I wanted to run. I always wanted to run. But I'd learned something years ago when I was still small enough to hide in closets and cry where no one could hear. Running only made them chase you. Standing still, becoming invisible. That was survival. The current performer finished, some beta woman singing a folk song about moon and blood, competent but forgettable. The crowd clapped politely, already losing interest. Then Elder Matthias called my name. "Sage, you're up." The walk to the platform felt like miles. I could feel their eyes, assessment and dismissal happening in the same breath. The wood creaked under my feet. Someone in the back made a sound between a cough and a laugh. I'd chosen to sing because it was the only thing I had. Not strength, not beauty, not the magnetic pull of a proper omega. Just this. A voice that came from somewhere deeper than my broken body, deeper than the shame they'd poured into me like water filling a cracked vessel. The accompanist, a bored-looking woman with a guitar, glanced at me with thinly veiled contempt. "What key?" "D minor," I whispered. She snorted. "Of course you'd pick something depressing." The first chord rang out, discordant in the noisy hall. No one was listening yet. They were too busy talking, drinking, sizing each other up for later when the real games would begin. The fights, the challenges, the mating claims. I opened my mouth and sang. The song was old, something I'd heard once in a fever dream during my first heat, when the pain had been so bad I'd thought I might die. No words anyone would recognize. Just sounds that felt like longing, like the ache of being unwanted, like the howl you swallow down because no one wants to hear it. My voice cracked on the first note. Someone snickered. But I kept going. And something strange began to happen. The noise in the hall didn't stop exactly, but it changed. Shifted. Like a current redirecting. I could feel it even with my eyes closed. The way attention, real attention, was a physical thing. A weight, a presence. I sang louder. Not because I was brave, but because the song demanded it. My voice steadied, found its footing in the melody. The words, if they were words, poured out like water from a broken dam. Everything I'd never been allowed to say. Every moment of smallness and silence and swallowed rage. The room went quiet. My eyes opened. And that's when I saw him. He stood at the entrance to the hall, framed by the doorway like something out of a nightmare or a myth. I couldn't decide which. Tall didn't begin to cover it. He was built like violence barely contained. Shoulders that could carry the weight of armies. Hands that could crush stone. His hair was dark, almost black, pulled back from a face that was all hard angles and sharp edges. Except for his eyes. His eyes were fixed on me, not in the way the others looked at me, with pity or contempt or casual cruelty. This was different. This was hunger. Not sexual, or not only sexual. Something deeper. The way a starving man looks at bread, the way the dying look at hope. I stumbled over the next line, my voice faltering. The stranger moved closer, cutting through the crowd like a blade through silk. People parted for him instinctively. Recognition and fear rippling outward, I saw Elder Matthias go pale. Saw Cassidy's mouth fall open in a way that would have been funny if I wasn't so terrified, because I knew who he was now. Everyone knew. The Lycan king didn't visit border packs like ours. We were too small, too insignificant, too far from the center of power. He ruled from the northern territories, a figure more legend than real, spoken about in whispers and warnings. They said he'd killed his own father to take the throne. They said he could shift faster than thought, that his wolf was bigger than a horse, that he'd ended 3 wars by simply showing up. They said a lot of things, but no one had ever said he looked like this, like barely leashed fury wrapped in expensive clothes, like the moment before a storm breaks, like the kind of beautiful that hurts to witness. He stopped 3 feet from the stage. His eyes never left mine. I should have looked away. Should have bowed my head, shown submission, done all the things weak Omegas are supposed to do when confronted with power that could snuff them out without effort. Instead, I finished the song. My voice shook, but I gave it everything. Every lonely night, every casual cruelty, every moment I'd felt like I was drowning in a world that had no use for me. The final note hung in the air like a question, like a prayer, like a challenge. Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. Then he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who's just found something unexpected, something interesting, something worth keeping. Again, he said. His voice was rough, like gravel and smoke, like something that shouldn't be gentle, but was trying. Sing it again. Behind him I saw my pack leader Thomas step forward, stammering. Your Majesty, we didn't know. We weren't informed. The Lycan king raised one hand, not even looking at Thomas, and the older man fell silent like he'd been struck. I wasn't talking to you, the king said softly. His gaze pinned me in place. I was talking to her, and in that moment, with the entire hall holding its breath, with Cassidy's face twisted in shock, and Elder Matthias looking like he might faint, and my own heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs, in that moment, I realized my life had just split into before and after, and I had no idea which side would destroy me. The accompanist's fingers were frozen over her guitar strings, waiting. Everyone was waiting. The king tilted his head slightly, and I caught something in his expression I didn't expect. Not command, not demand, but something almost like pleading. Please, he added, and that single word felt like the world tilting sideways. I drew a breath that tasted like fear and possibility and the sharp edge of change, and I began to sing again. The second time I sang, it was different. Not the song. The song was the same, wordless and aching, pulled from that place inside me. But everything else changed. The first time I'd been singing to survive, to get through another ritual humiliation and retreat back into my corner of invisibility. Now I was singing to him. I didn't mean to, didn't choose it. But his eyes held me like hands, and my voice responded to something in his stillness. The way he watched me like I was the only thing in the room worth watching. The melody twisted, deepened, found notes I didn't know I could reach. The hall had gone from silent to something beyond silence. A held breath, a pause between heartbeats. When the last note faded, I felt it like a loss. The king didn't move for a long moment. Then he turned to Thomas, who looked like he'd aged a decade in the last 5 minutes. This one, the king said, gesturing at me without looking away. What's her status? Thomas swallowed audibly. Sage, Your Majesty. She's Omega class, unmated. 19 years old, 21, I corrected before I could stop myself. Every head in the room swiveled toward me. You didn't interrupt an alpha. You definitely didn't interrupt your pack leader. And you absolutely did not correct someone while they were addressing the Lycan king. But the king's mouth quirked at the corner, almost a smile. 21. he repeated, like he was tasting the word. Old for an unclaimed Omega, the insult landed like it always did, but somehow lighter coming from him, maybe because everyone already knew. Maybe because his tone held curiosity instead of contempt. "She's weak, Your Majesty," Cassidy interjected, stepping forward with that practiced grace that made everyone look at her. She'd changed tactics fast. If she couldn't have the spotlight, she'd position herself as helpful, knowledgeable, indispensable. Barely registers as Omega. No proper heat cycle. No scent markers. We keep her out of charity, really. I wanted to vanish into the floorboards. Charity, the king echoed, still not looking at anyone but me. Interesting. He moved then, not toward Thomas or the elders or any of the important people, but toward the stage, toward me. Each step was deliberate, controlled, like he was giving me time to run. I didn't run. Couldn't. My legs had apparently decided to stop taking orders from my brain. He stopped at the edge of the platform, close enough that I could smell him. Pine and snow and something wilder, something that made my wolf stir uneasily inside me. My wolf, who barely ever showed herself, who'd been silent and small since the day she first emerged. "Do you sing often?" he asked. "When they make me," I answered honestly. The words came out sharper than I intended. His eyebrow lifted. "Make you?" I gestured vaguely at the hall, at the pack, at the whole degrading spectacle. The gathering. Everyone has to contribute something useful. This is what I have. And what do you get in return? The question caught me off guard. No one had ever asked me that before. "I get to stay," I said quietly. Something flickered across his face. Anger, maybe, or recognition. He understood what I meant. Understood that staying wasn't the same as belonging, that it was the bare minimum of tolerance dressed up as mercy. "Your Majesty," Elder Matthias ventured carefully, "perhaps we should discuss this in private." "No." The single word cracked like a whip. The king finally looked away from me, and the weight of his attention shifting felt like sudden cold. "I'll be taking her with me when I leave tonight." The room erupted. Not loudly. No one was stupid enough to shout in front of him, but in frantic whispers, shocked faces, the kind of chaos that happens when something impossible becomes real. Thomas stepped forward, hands raised in placation. "Your Majesty, with all respect, we would need to discuss terms, arrange proper—" "I'm not negotiating," the king said flatly. "I'm informing you." "But she's Pack," Thomas protested weakly, and the hypocrisy of it. Pretending they cared now, pretending I mattered, made my throat tight. "She's wasted here." The king's voice carried across the hall, commanding attention even when he wasn't trying. "I'm offering her a place in the Northern Territories, a position in my household." "As what?" Cassidy's voice was sharp with jealousy poorly hidden. "A servant? A curiosity?" The king's eyes went cold, as whatever she chooses to be, which is more than she has here. He turned back to me, and his expression softened fractionally. "Unless you prefer to stay?" It was the first time anyone had asked me what I wanted. Ever. I thought about my room in the pack house, barely larger than a closet, the walls thin enough to hear Cassidy and her friends laughing about me at night. Thought about the years stretching ahead, each one the same as the last. Tolerated but never wanted, useful but never valued. Thought about the way he'd looked at me while I sang. Like I was something precious. It was probably a lie, probably a trick. Powerful men didn't save weak Omegas out of kindness, but it was a different cage at least. And maybe, just maybe, one with a door I could open from the inside. "I'll go," I said. The king nodded once, like he'd expected nothing less. "Good. Gather whatever you need. We leave in an hour." "An hour?" Thomas sputtered. "Your Majesty, surely—" "An hour," the king repeated, and this time there was no mistaking the command in it. I climbed down from the stage on shaking legs, hyper-aware of every eye following me. The crowd parted, giving me space for the first time in my life. Not out of respect, but out of confusion, fear, the scrambling readjustment that happens when the hierarchy suddenly shifts. Cassidy grabbed my arm as I passed, her nails digging in. What did you do? She hissed. I sang, I said, pulling free. You told me to perform. I performed. Her face twisted with something ugly. He'll get bored of you. Whatever this is, it won't last. And when he sends you back, then I'll deal with it. I interrupted. But right now, I'm leaving. I walked away before she could respond, before any of them could say anything else that would make me doubt, make me small again. My room looked even more pathetic than usual when I entered it. A narrow bed with a thin blanket. A single dresser with clothes I'd worn until they were nearly threadbare. A window that looked out onto the woods where I used to walk when the pack house became too suffocating. I owned almost nothing worth taking, but I packed it anyway. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, underwear that had seen better days, the boots I'd saved for months to buy. Everything fit into a canvas bag that had been old when I'd found it in the donation pile. I was closing the clasps when I heard the knock. Come in, I called, expecting Thomas or maybe one of the elders come to talk me out of leaving, to remind me of my place. The door opened. The Lycan king had to duck slightly to enter, and the room seemed to shrink around him, all the empty spaces suddenly filled with his presence. You came yourself, I said stupidly. I wanted to make sure you were all right. He stood awkwardly near the door, like he wasn't sure if he should come closer. That was intense, downstairs. That was you claiming me in front of my entire pack without asking first, I corrected. He had the grace to look slightly guilty. Would you have preferred I asked in front of them? Given them the chance to pressure you, to make you feel obligated to refuse? The accuracy of that stung. He'd read the situation perfectly, understood the dynamics at play. Why? I asked. The question I'd been holding since he first commanded me to sing again. Why me? You could have anyone. You're the Lycan king, and You're what? He moved closer, and I became acutely aware of how small my room was, how big he was. Weak? Broken? Not worth noticing? Each word was something I'd been called, thought about myself, carried like stones in my chest. Those are their words, he said softly. Not mine. Then what are your words? He was close enough now that I could see the silver flecks in his dark eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his skin, close enough to be dangerous, captivating, he said. Brave. Real. You don't know me. No, he agreed, but I'd like to. His hand lifted slowly, giving me time to move away, to refuse. When I didn't, his fingers brushed my cheek, gentle in a way that made my breath catch. You sang like someone who knows what it means to hurt, he murmured, like someone who survived things that should have broken them. I recognize that. He paused, something vulnerable flashing across his features. I haven't heard music in 3 years. Not really. Everything sounds hollow now, empty. Until tonight, I whispered. Until you. His thumb traced the line of my jaw. So yes, maybe I'm being selfish. Maybe I'm taking you with me because I need to hear that again, need to remember what it feels like to feel something. But I promise you this. No one in my territory will treat you the way they did here. No one will make you feel worthless. And if they try... His eyes went hard. They'll answer to me. It should have terrified me, the intensity of him, the way he looked at me like a man starving. Instead, I felt something unfurl in my chest. Something that felt dangerously like hope. Okay, I said. Okay? Okay. I'll come with you. I'll sing for you. We'll figure out the rest. His smile was like sunrise, slow, beautiful, transforming. We will, he promised. And standing in my tiny room with my pathetic bag of belongings and a man who could crush me without thinking, I believed him. The knock came again, sharper this time. Thomas's voice filtered through. Your Majesty, the hour is nearly up. The king's expression shuddered back to command. We're ready. He took my bag before I could protest, slinging it over his shoulder like it weighed nothing. Come on, he said, offering his other hand. Let's go home. I took it. His palm was warm, calloused, steady, and together, we walked out of the only life I'd ever known, into something terrifying and unknown and possibly, impossibly, better. The journey north took 2 days, not because of distance. The king had vehicles waiting, sleek black SUVs that screamed money and power, but because he kept stopping. The first stop came 3 hours after we'd left my pack's territory. We'd been driving in silence, me pressed against the window watching forests blur past, him working on a laptop with the kind of focus that made me afraid to breathe too loudly. Then he'd closed the laptop abruptly and told the driver to pull over at the next town. "You need clothes," he'd said, like it was obvious. "I have clothes. You have 3 shirts and jeans with holes in the knees." He'd seen inside my bag, apparently. Noticed everything I'd hoped he wouldn't. "You need more." The store he took me to wasn't like anything I'd seen before. No fluorescent lights or discount racks. Everything was soft lighting and quiet music and price tags that made my stomach hurt. "I can't afford this," I'd whispered when he started pulling things off shelves. Sweaters, jeans, a coat that probably cost more than I'd spent on clothes in my entire life. "Good thing I'm paying then," he'd replied, not even looking at the prices. "I don't need charity." He'd turned to face me then, something sharp in his expression. "It's not charity, Sage. You're part of my household now. That means you dress appropriately. That means you have what you need." His voice softened. "That means you don't have to wear other people's cast-offs anymore." I'd felt tears prick my eyes and hated myself for it. "Hey." His hand on my shoulder, gentle. "I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm trying to make things better. Let me do this. Please." So I'd let him. Let him buy me clothes that actually fit, that were new, that didn't smell like someone else's life. Let him watch as the saleswoman measured me properly for the first time, treated me like I mattered, smiled at me like I was a real customer instead of a charity case. When we'd left, I was wearing new jeans and a sweater so soft I kept touching it to make sure it was real. "Thank you," I'd said quietly as we drove away. "You're welcome," he'd replied, and there was something in his voice that made me think this was as much for him as it was for me. The second stop came the next morning, at a roadside diner that looked like it belonged in a postcard. Red vinyl booths and chrome fixtures and a waitress who called everyone honey. I'd expected him to order for me, the way alphas usually did, expected to be told what I could have, what was appropriate for someone like me. Instead, he'd slid the menu across and said, "Get whatever you want." "I'm not very hungry. Sage." He'd waited until I looked up at him. "When's the last time you ate a real meal?" I'd tried to remember and couldn't. The pack fed me, technically, leftovers mostly. Whatever was easiest to spare. "Get whatever you want," he'd repeated, firmer this time. So I'd ordered pancakes and eggs and bacon, more food than I usually ate in a day. And when it came, I'd eaten slowly, savoring every bite, trying not to notice the way he watched me with something like satisfaction. "Better?" he'd asked when I'd finished. "Yeah." I'd felt full for the first time in months, maybe years. "Thank you." "Stop thanking me for basic things," he'd said, but his tone was gentle. "You shouldn't have to be grateful for food and clothes and being treated like you matter." "But I am," I'd admitted. "Grateful, I mean." He'd reached across the table and taken my hand, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. "Then you've been around the wrong people for too long." We'd arrived at the Northern Territories late on the second day, just as the sun was setting. I'd expected a city, buildings and crowds and the kind of organized chaos that came with power concentrated in one place. Instead, we'd driven into dense forest, the road winding up into mountains until we'd emerged into a valley that took my breath away. The pack house, though house felt like an insult to what I was seeing, sprawled across cleared land like something out of a dream, stone and timber and glass, built to blend with the landscape rather than dominate it. Lights glowed warm in windows. People moved between buildings, purpose in their steps, but no urgency, no fear. "Home," the king said, and there was something almost tentative in the word, like he wasn't sure it would feel like that to me. "It's beautiful," I breathed. "Wait until you see the inside." He was right to sound confident. The main hall was all high ceilings and natural wood, a massive fireplace at one end throwing heat and light across space that managed to feel both grand and welcoming. People gathered in clusters, talking, laughing, living. And when we entered, they looked up with interest rather than judgment. "Everyone," the king called, his voice carrying without effort. "This is Sage. She'll be staying with us." No explanation beyond that. No elaboration on my status or purpose or why he'd brought home a weak Omega from a border pack. A woman approached first, tall, with dark skin and silver-threaded hair pulled back in intricate braids. She looked at me with eyes that saw too much, assessed too quickly, but her smile seemed genuine. "Welcome," she said. "I'm Deanna, head of household. You must be exhausted." "A little," I admitted. "More than a little, I'd guess." Diana glanced at the king with something like reproach. "Did you even let her rest on the drive up?" "We stopped," he said defensively. Diana turned back to me. "Come on, honey. Let's get you settled in a proper room with a proper bed. His Majesty can survive without you for an hour." "Actually," the king started. "An hour," Diana repeated firmly, and I watched in fascination as the most powerful Lycan in the territories backed down. "An hour," he agreed. His eyes found mine. "I'll see you at dinner?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Diana led me through corridors that twisted and turned, upstairs and down hallways, until I was thoroughly lost. Finally, she stopped at a door and pushed it open. "Here," she said. "This is yours." The room was bigger than the entire space I'd had back at my old pack. A real bed, queen-sized, with blankets that looked thick and warm, windows that overlooked the forest, a bathroom attached, with a tub deep enough to actually soak in. "This is too much," I said automatically. "It's the smallest guest room we have," Diana replied. "And before you argue, everyone here has a proper space. That's how we do things in the North. No hierarchy in comfort." She walked to the window, looked out at the darkening sky. "I'm going to say something, and I want you to really hear it. Can you do that?" I nodded. "The king brought you here for a reason. Maybe he's told you what that reason is, maybe he hasn't, but I've known him since he was a boy, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you when you walked in." She turned to face me. "That said, you don't owe him anything. Not gratitude, not loyalty, certainly not your body or your affection. You're here as his guest, not his prisoner. If you want to leave, you leave. If you want to stay but set boundaries, you set them. Understand? Why are you telling me this?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Because power imbalances are dangerous things," Diana said simply, "and because I've seen too many young women, especially Omegas, get lost in them. You seem like you've got a good head on your shoulders, but even the smartest of us can get confused when someone powerful pays attention." "I'm not confused," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. Diana smiled. "Good. Keep it that way." She moved toward the door. "Dinner's at 7. Casual dress, just come as you are. And Sage?" She paused in the doorway. "I mean it about the boundaries. Test them. See what holds." Mint. Then she was gone, leaving me alone in this room that was mine, in this place that seemed impossible. With thoughts spinning too fast to catch, I tested the bed first. Soft. So soft I almost cried. Then the bathroom, where I ran water just to watch it flow clear and hot without sputtering. Opened the closet and found it empty, waiting to be filled with things that were mine. The shower felt like baptism. I stood under water hot enough to turn my skin pink, watching weeks of exhaustion and fear swirl down the drain. Used soap that smelled like honey and clean things, wrapped myself in a towel so thick and soft it felt like luxury. When I emerged, I found clothes laid out on the bed, not the new things from our shopping trip, but something else. A dress, simple but beautiful, deep green that would match my eyes, a note pinned to it in handwriting I didn't recognize. "Thought you might like something nice for dinner. No pressure." D. Diana then, looking out for me already. I almost put on my jeans out of spite, out of that ingrained need to reject anything that felt like charity. But the dress was beautiful, and I was tired of wearing my armor all the time, tired of choosing discomfort because it felt safer than accepting kindness. So I put it on. It fit perfectly, hugging curves I usually hid, falling just above my knees. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Clean, fed, dressed like someone worth looking at, like someone who belonged. The thought terrified me. Dinner was less formal than I'd feared. A long table in a dining room that felt more like someone's home than a royal hall. People gathering casually, conversations flowing easy. I counted maybe 20 people, all ages, all looking comfortable and relaxed. The king sat at the head of the table, but it wasn't a throne, just a chair like all the others. He stood when I entered, and I felt the room's attention shift. "Sage," he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like something precious. "Come sit." There was an empty chair beside him, of course there was. I crossed the room, feeling every eye on me, slid into the seat with as much grace as I could manage. "You look beautiful," he murmured, low enough that only I could hear. "Diana left me the dress." "I know, I asked her to." He must have seen my expression because he added quickly, "Not because what you had wasn't fine, but because I thought you might like options. Was I wrong?" "No," I admitted. It's nice, thank you." "There you go, thanking me again. I'll stop when you stop doing things worth thanking you for." His laugh was surprised, genuine. "Fair enough." Dinner was simple food served in abundance. Roasted meat and vegetables, bread that steamed when you broke it open, wine that tasted like autumn. People talked around us, pulling me into conversations without making me the center of them, asking about my journey north, where I'd grown up, what I liked to do. Normal questions, human questions. No one asked why I was there. No one questioned my presence or my worth. It felt like drowning in reverse, like learning to breathe after years underwater. "You're quiet," the king observed when conversation had fragmented into smaller groups. "I'm processing," I said honestly. "Is it too much? We can eat in my quarters if you prefer." "No." I surprised myself with how firm that came out. "No, this is good, really good. I'm just not used to it." His hand found mine under the table, squeezed gently. "You'll get used to it, I promise." "What if I don't want to?" The words escaped before I could stop them. "What if getting used to this means it'll hurt more when it's gone?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What makes you so sure it'll be gone?" "Because good things don't stay," I said. "Not for people like me." "Sage." He turned in his chair to face me properly, eyes intense. "I need you to understand something. I didn't bring you here on a whim. I didn't bring you here to play with you or use you or discard you when I get bored. I brought you here because when you sang, something in me that's been dead for 3 years woke up. Because you make me feel human again. Because—" He stopped himself, jaw tightening. "Because?" I prompted. "Because I think you might be my mate," he finished quietly. The words hit like physical force. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I'm Omega. Weak. You're the Lycan King. Yes, I'm aware." His smile was crooked. "And you're the woman who stood on a rickety stage in front of people who treated you like garbage and sang like your heart was breaking. You're the woman who corrected me in front of your pack leader. You're the woman who looked at everything I could offer and still asked what the catch was." He squeezed my hand again. "Nothing about you is weak, Sage. And I'd very much like the chance to prove that to you." I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Could only stare at him and feel the world rearranging itself around this moment. "I don't know how," I admitted. "How to what?" "How to be someone's mate. How to be worth this. Any of this." "Then we'll figure it out together," he said simply. "No pressure. No expectations. Just possibility. Possibility." The word felt dangerous and delicious in equal measure. "Okay," I said. "Yeah?" "Yeah." His smile could have lit the entire valley. And sitting there, hand in his, surrounded by warmth and food and people who hadn't once looked at me like I was broken, I let myself believe, just for a moment, that maybe Diana was wrong. Maybe good things could stay. Maybe I could keep this. The first week passed in a blur of adjustment and small revelations. I learned that the king's name was Declan, though most people still called him Your Majesty or Sire out of habit. I learned that he woke before dawn every morning to run the perimeter in wolf form, that he took his coffee black and burned, that he had a scar across his ribs from a challenge fight when he was 17. I learned that Diana ran the household with efficiency that bordered on telepathy, always knowing what was needed before anyone asked, that there were 43 people living in the main compound, with another 100 scattered across the territory in smaller settlements. That Declan's second in command was a woman named Rowan, who could break a man's arm in 3 places before he realized she'd moved. I learned that no one here treated Omegas like lesser beings. That revelation came on the 3rd day, when I'd ventured into the communal kitchen looking for tea and found an Omega man, maybe 30, with laugh lines around his eyes, directing a team of betas and alphas in meal prep like a general commanding troops. "You must be Sage," he'd said, wiping flour-dusted hands on his apron. "I'm James, head chef, professional meddler, and according to Diana, your unofficial welcome committee. I don't need—" "A welcome committee, yes. Everyone says that." He'd thrust a mug of tea into my hands before I could finish protesting. "But you're getting one anyway. Sit. Tell me what you think of the place so far." So I'd sat. And somehow, in the warmth of that kitchen with James chattering about recipes and territory gossip, I'd started to relax. "Can I ask you something?" I'd ventured after a while. "Anything. Why doesn't anyone here treat Omegas like we're worthless? Weak? Inferior?" James had supplied cheerfully, "Because Declan would rip their throat out for starters. But more than that, because it's stupid." "You think Omega means weak? I've got 3 alpha warriors who can't make a decent soup to save their lives. I've got betas who panic in a crisis. Strength isn't about designation, it's about what you do with what you've got." He'd leaned against the counter, expression turning more serious. Declan's father was old school, believed in all that hierarchy garbage, treated Omegas like breeding stock or servants. When Declan took over, first thing he did was change the laws. Equal rights, equal opportunities, equal respect. Anyone who doesn't like it can leave. Did many leave? Some. The assholes, mostly. Good riddance. James had grinned. The rest of us stayed and built something better. I'd carried those words with me like a talisman. Declan had given me space that first week. No pressure, like he'd promised, but he'd found small ways to be present. Joining me for breakfast, asking if I wanted to walk the grounds with him, inviting me to sit in his office while he worked through paperwork. "You don't have to entertain me," I'd said on the 5th day, watching him frown at some report. "I'm not entertaining you. I'm enjoying your company." He'd glanced up. "Unless you'd prefer I leave you alone?" "No, I don't want to be a burden. Sage." He'd set down his pen, giving me his full attention. "You keep using that word, burden. Like your presence here is something I'm tolerating instead of something I want. Why? Because that's what I'd always been. A burden to be managed, tolerated, endured. Old habits," I'd said quietly. "Then let's build new ones." He'd stood, come around the desk. "I want you here. Not because you're useful or entertaining or any other transactional reason. I want you here because you make this place feel less empty. Because when you're near me, I breathe easier. Is that clear enough?" I'd nodded, not trusting my voice. "Good." He'd hesitated, then added, "Diana mentioned you might be interested in the library?" I'd perked up despite myself. "There's a library?" His smile had been answer enough. The library had become my refuge. 3 stories of books organized by some system only Diana seemed to understand fully, with windows that let in perfect reading light and chairs so comfortable I kept falling asleep in them. I'd been curled in one such chair, deep in a novel about a world where wolves didn't exist and people drove metal machines through the sky, when I'd heard voices from the floor below. "Don't understand why he's keeping her here." A woman's voice, sharp with frustration. "She's nobody. A weak Omega from a nothing pack." Maybe that's why. A male voice, calmer. No political complications, no alliances to navigate. Or maybe he's just lonely and she was convenient. The woman again. "You saw how he looked at her that first night, like she was some kind of miracle. It's pathetic." My chest had tightened. I should have left. Should have made noise so they'd know I could hear. Instead, I'd stayed frozen, listening. "Careful, Miranda." The man's tone had shifted, warning entering it. "That's your king you're talking about. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. He brings home some damaged stray, parades her around like she's special, and we're all supposed to pretend it makes sense. She can't even shift properly, from what I heard. What kind of mate is that for the Lycan king? The kind he chose." A new voice had cut in. Rowan's, cold and sharp as a blade. which means she's under his protection. And if I hear you talking about her like that again, Miranda, I'll make sure you're reassigned to Border Patrol. In winter. Are we clear? Silence. Then footsteps retreating quickly. I'd stayed in my chair, stomach churning, the book forgotten in my lap, damaged stray. Can't even shift properly. The words had burrowed under my skin like splinters. You can come down now, Rowan had called up. They're gone. I'd descended slowly, found her standing with arms crossed, expression unreadable. How long were you listening? I'd asked. Long enough to know you heard the worst of it. She'd studied me. Miranda's a mean-spirited gossip. Don't let her get in your head. She's not wrong, though. The admission had hurt. I am weak. I can't shift properly. My wolf barely shows. And I am nobody. You're somebody to Declan, Rowan had said flatly. That makes you somebody to the rest of us. End of discussion. But it hadn't been the end. Not really. The words had festered. That night, I'd barely touched dinner. Declan had noticed. Of course he'd noticed. But I'd made excuses about being tired, needing rest. Sage. He'd caught my arm gently as I'd stood to leave. What's wrong? Nothing. Don't lie to me. Please. I'd looked at him. This powerful, beautiful man who could have anyone. And felt the weight of my inadequacy crushing me. Why me? The question had torn out of me. Really? Not the pretty version. Not the version where you tell me I'm special. Why would you want someone like me as your mate? His expression had shuddered. Who said something to you? It doesn't matter. It does to me. His voice had gone dangerously quiet. Tell me. So I had. Told him what I'd overheard, watching his face darken with each word. Miranda, he'd said when I'd finished. Rowan already handled it, not well enough. He'd stood, and I'd seen the king then, not the man who brought me tea and asked about my day. Excuse me. Declan, wait. But he'd been gone, moving with purpose that made people scatter from his path. I'd followed, heart hammering, knowing I should let it go but unable to stop myself. Found him in the main hall, Miranda summoned and looking pale, Rowan standing to the side with something like satisfaction in her eyes. Your Majesty, I didn't mean... Miranda had started. You called her a damaged stray. Declan's voice had been arctic. You questioned my choice of mate in front of witnesses. You suggested she wasn't worthy of being here. I was just talking. You were undermining my authority and attacking someone under my protection. He'd stepped closer, and Miranda had actually stumbled back. In this territory, we don't degrade people for things they can't control. We don't judge worth by designation or bloodline. And we sure as hell don't gossip about our future queen like she's some entertaining scandal. Future queen. The words had hit me like lightning. I'm sorry, Miranda had whispered. I didn't think... No, you didn't. And that's the problem. Declan had turned away, dismissing her. You're on Border Patrol for the next month. Maybe the cold will teach you to think before you speak. Miranda had fled. The hall had been silent. Declan had found me standing in the doorway, had crossed to me with something raw in his expression. I'm sorry, he'd said, that you had to hear that anyone would speak about you that way in my territory. Future queen, I'd managed. He'd gone still. Yes, I probably should have discussed that with you first, before announcing it to the entire pack. You think? The words had come out sharper than I'd intended, hysteria bubbling up. Declan, I can barely handle being here. How am I supposed to be queen, the same way I learned to be king? He'd taken my hands. By trying, by failing sometimes, by having people around you who believe you can do it. But I can't even shift properly. So what? His intensity had startled me. Sage, I don't care if you never shift again. That's not why I want you. I want you because you're brave and honest and kind, even when the world has given you every reason not to be. I want you because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to hope for something beyond duty and survival. Tears had burned my eyes. What if I can't be what you need? You already are. He'd pulled me closer. But if you're not ready for this, for us, I'll wait. I'll wait as long as you need. I'd stood there in his arms, feeling his heartbeat steady against my cheek, and made a decision. I want to try, I'd whispered. To be your mate, your queen, whatever that means. I want to try. His arms had tightened around me. Yeah? Yeah. He'd pulled back just enough to look at me, and what I'd seen in his face had stolen my breath. Hope and fear and want all tangled together. Can I kiss you? He'd asked. I'd answered by rising on my toes and pressing my lips to his. The kiss had been gentle at first, careful, like he was afraid I'd break, but when I'd made a small sound and pressed closer, something had shifted. His hand had come up to cradle my face. His mouth had opened against mine, and I'd felt the careful control he'd been maintaining crack just slightly. When we'd finally broken apart, both breathing hard, his forehead had rested against mine. I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you, he'd confessed. Took you long enough. His laugh had been surprised and delighted. Are you teasing me? Maybe. I'd felt something loosen in my chest, something light and unfamiliar. Is that allowed? It's encouraged. He'd kissed me again, softer this time. Stay with me tonight? Just to sleep. He'd added quickly. I don't want to be apart from you. I'd thought about my room, big and beautiful and lonely. Thought about his arms around me, the sound of his breathing, the safety of not being alone. Okay, I'd said. And that night, curled against his chest in his enormous bed, with the moon streaming through windows and his hand stroking slowly through my hair, I'd felt something I'd never felt before. I'd felt home. 3 months changed everything, not in the dramatic way stories usually told it. No sudden transformation, no magical moment where I woke up different. Just small shifts, day by day. Like ice melting so gradually you didn't notice until suddenly there was water where solid ground used to be. I learned to accept kindness without flinching. Learned that Declan's promises weren't traps waiting to snap shut. Learned that the people here genuinely didn't care that I couldn't shift fully. That my wolf stayed small and timid when she finally did emerge during a full moon run. She's beautiful, Declan had said, nuzzling against my smaller form with his massive black wolf, and he'd meant it. I'd started helping James in the kitchen, discovering I had a talent for baking that no one, including me, had suspected. Started joining Diana on her rounds, learning the intricate web of relationships and responsibilities that kept the territory running. Started training with Rowan, who taught me that physical strength wasn't the only kind that mattered. You've got good instincts, she'd said after I'd successfully dodged 3 of her strikes in a row. You read people. That's worth more than muscle in a real fight. But the biggest change came the day a messenger arrived from the council. I'd been in the library, always the library, when Declan had found me, his expression tight with something I'd learned to recognize as political anger. What happened? I'd asked, closing my book. The council wants to meet you. He'd paced the length of the room. They've been skeptical about our bond, about you. The old fears had stirred, because I'm weak. Because you're not from a powerful bloodline, he'd corrected. Because they can't leverage you for alliances or political gain. Because you're choosing to be with me for reasons they don't understand. Love, I'd said quietly. That's the reason they don't understand. He'd stopped pacing, turned to look at me with such intensity I'd felt it like heat. Say that again. What? What you just said. The reason. My heart had stuttered. We'd been careful with that word, dancing around it even as it became increasingly obvious. Love, I'd repeated, stronger this time. I love you. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm staying. He'd crossed the distance between us in 3 strides, pulled me up from the chair and kissed me like I was air and he was drowning. I love you too, he'd said against my mouth, in case that wasn't clear. I'd laughed, giddy and terrified and certain all at once. It was becoming clear, yeah, good. Another kiss. Because I'm going to need you to remember that when we meet with the council. They're going to try to make you doubt yourself, doubt us. Don't let them. The council meeting had been scheduled for the following week, giving us time to prepare. Diana had helped me choose appropriate clothes, formal enough to show respect, but not so elaborate I'd feel like I was wearing a costume. Rowan had coached me on council politics, who the key players were, what they'd likely try. Elder Frost will question your bloodline, she'd said, Don't get defensive. Just state facts. Elder Vance will bring up your wolf, James had added. He joined our impromptu strategy session, uninvited, but welcome. He's old school. Thinks strong wolves equal strong mates. And Elder Thorn will probably just be a jerk for the sake of being a jerk, Diana had finished. Don't take it personally. He's like that with everyone. The day of the meeting, I'd woken before dawn, too nervous to sleep. Found Declan already awake, staring out the window at the pre-dawn darkness. Can't sleep either? I'd asked. Thinking. He'd pulled me against his chest, chin resting on top of my head. About how much I want to tell them all to go to hell and keep you away from their judgment. But you won't. No, because you're going to be queen. And that means facing them, proving you belong. He'd turned me to face him. But know this, no matter what they say, no matter how they try to diminish you, I know your worth. We know your worth. That might have to be enough, I'd said. It is enough. The council convened in a formal hall I hadn't seen before, all stone and solemn atmosphere. 7 elders sat in a semicircle, with Declan's chair, his throne, really, positioned at the center. A smaller chair had been placed beside it. For me. Members of the council, Declan had begun, his voice carrying the weight of command. I present Sage, my chosen mate, and your future queen. I'd stood beside him, chin up, refusing to let them see me shake. Elder Frost had spoken first, just as Rowan predicted. Your bloodline, girl. What pack do you hail from? Whitestone Pack Elder, a border territory in the southern region. Border territory. Frost had said it like a curse. No significant lineage then. No notable wolves in your family tree? Not that I'm aware of, Elder. And your designation? This from Elder Vance, his eyes sharp and assessing. You're Omega, correct? Yes, Elder. Have you completed a mating bond with His Majesty? The question had been designed to embarrass, to make me feel small. I'd felt Declan tense beside me. That's not relevant to this council, Declan had said, his voice cold. It's relevant to succession, Vance had countered. If she can't bear strong heirs. Elder Vance. Rowan had stepped forward from where she'd been standing at attention. With respect. The Queen's ability to bear children is her private medical concern, not council business. We have a right to know if the royal line will continue. You have a right to respect your king's choice. Declan had cut in, and the room had gone silent. Sage is my mate. That decision is final. Your role here is to acknowledge it, not question it. Elder Thorn had leaned forward, a smile playing at his lips that made my skin crawl. The boy makes a fair point, though. She's not exactly impressive, is she? Small, weak-looking. Can you even shift properly, girl? I'd felt the trap closing, felt all the old wounds opening. Then I'd remembered something Diana had told me weeks ago. They want you to be ashamed. Don't give them that power. My wolf is small, I'd said clearly. She doesn't have the size or strength of an alpha's wolf. But she exists. She's part of me. And if that's not impressive to you, Elder Thorn, then I suppose we'll have to agree to disagree. Silence. Then, Elder Thorn had laughed. Actually laughed. Well, she's got spine at least. That's something. She's got more than spine, Declan had said. She's got intelligence, compassion, and the courage to stand here and face your judgment when she could have chosen to stay hidden. Those are the qualities I want in my queen. Those are the qualities this territory needs. Pretty speech, Elder Frost had said. But speeches don't change facts. She's unsuitable. I'm done listening to this, Declan had stood, and the force of his presence had filled the room. You want facts? Here's one. I haven't felt alive in years. Not since I took this throne, not since I started playing these political games you all love so much. Then Sage walked into my life and reminded me what it means to feel something real. He'd looked at me, and I'd seen everything in that gaze. Love and need and absolute certainty. She makes me better, he'd continued. She makes this place better, and if you can't see that, then maybe it's time we discuss term limits for council positions. The threat had been clear. The room had practically vibrated with tension. Finally, Elder Thorn had broken the silence. I vote to acknowledge the bond. As do I. another elder had added quickly. One by one, they'd voted. Not unanimous. Frost and Vance had held out, but enough to make it official. I was going to be queen. The realization hadn't hit fully until later, after the formalities were done, and Declan and I were alone in our quarters. That was terrifying, I'd admitted, collapsing onto the bed. You were magnificent. He'd joined me, pulling me close. Did you see Frost's face when you called him out? I thought I was going to throw up, but you didn't. You stood there and proved exactly why you belong here. I'd shifted to look at him properly. Do you really think I'll make a good queen? I think you'll make a great queen. He'd kissed my forehead. Because you care about people, not power. Because you know what it's like to be overlooked, and you'll make sure no one else feels that way. Because you're you. That's a lot of pressure. Then it's good you won't be doing it alone. The ceremony happened 6 weeks later. Not a wedding, exactly, since we'd technically already bonded, but a formal acknowledgement before the entire territory. I'd stood in front of hundreds of wolves, wearing a dress Diana had commissioned specially, and listened as Declan spoke vows that made my eyes burn with unshed tears. I choose you, he'd said, his hands holding mine. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. Not because you're powerful, but because you're kind. I choose you, Sage, every day for the rest of our lives. When it had been my turn, I'd looked out at the crowd, at Diana smiling with satisfaction, at James wiping his eyes, at Rowan standing at attention but with pride clear in her expression, at all these people who'd become my family, and felt something unlock in my chest. I choose you too, I'd said to Declan. You saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when I felt worthless. You loved me when I didn't know how to love myself. And I promised to spend every day trying to be worthy of that gift. You already are, he'd whispered. And then he'd kissed me while the territory erupted in howls of celebration. That night, after the feast and the dancing and the endless congratulations, we'd slipped away to the forest. To the place where I'd first run with my small, timid wolf beside his massive one. Do you ever regret it? I'd asked, watching moonlight filter through the trees. Choosing me instead of someone stronger, someone more suitable? Declan had pulled me against him, his chin resting on my shoulder. Never, not once, not ever. Even though I'll never be a strong fighter, even though my wolf is small? Sage. He'd turned me to face him. Strength isn't about size or power. It's about getting knocked down and standing back up. It's about facing people who tell you you're worthless and proving them wrong just by existing. It's about choosing love, even when you've been taught you don't deserve it. He'd cupped my face in his hands. You're the strongest person I know, and I am so fucking proud to be your mate. I'd kissed him then, pouring everything into it. Gratitude and love and the bone-deep certainty that this was real. This was mine. This was home. I love you, I'd said against his mouth. I love you too. He'd smiled. My queen. Your queen, I'd agreed. And for the first time in my life, I believed I was worthy of the title. Years later, when people asked how a weak Omega from a nothing pack became Queen of the Northern Territories, I'd tell them the truth. Not through strength or power or political maneuvering, through surviving, through refusing to let cruelty make me cruel, through believing, even when it seemed impossible, that I deserved to be loved, and through finding a king who saw me not as I'd been told I was, but as I actually was. That was the real magic, not transformation, but recognition. Not becoming someone new, but finally being seen as I'd always been. Worthy, enough, home.